Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome to our Curious Amalgam, a podcast produced by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association, and sister podcast of Trust and Trade, which I regularly co-host. I'm your host, Anant, Raut, and in today's episode, we plunge into the world of cryptocurrency, asking, is crypto just a giant pump-and-dump scheme? Joining me today is my co-host, Yeater, an economic consultant with Analysis Group.
Hi, Anant. How are you?
I'm good. Aaron, let's introduce our guests. First, we have Molly White, software engineer and crypto critic. For those of you who follow crypto, you may know her as the founder of the website Web3 is Going Great, a popular industry blog in which she highlights many examples of how cryptocurrency and Web3 projects more broadly are failing to live up to their promises. She's also the author of the newsletter Citation Needed. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Carolyn Welshhans, Associate Director of the Division of Enforcement at the Securities and Exchange Commission, who was formerly Acting Chief of the Division's Crypto Assets and Cyber Unit. Previously, she was also an Assistant Director in the Enforcement Division's Cyber Unit and Market Abuse Unit. Carolyn has supervised numerous significant enforcement actions involving insider trading, market structure, cybersecurity, unregistered offerings, investment advisors, broker-dealers, and public company accounting and financial disclosure violations. Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Aaron, I thought a good place to start our discussion today was with a brief history of money. What is money?
What is money indeed? The economists will tell you that money serves three purposes. So first and foremost, and probably least interesting, it's a unit of account. Just lets us count up the things that we have and the value of those things. Secondly, it's a medium of exchange. So it facilitates our ability to trade one thing for the other much more efficiently than it would be if we attempted to convert chickens to cows or eggs to something else. And thirdly, it's a store of value, which means that I can trade something for money now and hold on to that money, and it retains that value much more effectively than, say, with those eggs.
So money's been around for over 5,000 years, and we've seen an evolution over that time from cowrie shells. Then we see coinage made from actual precious metals like gold and silver. There's the Lydian stater, which facilitated trade, making the kingdom of Lydia and its king, Croesus, fabulously wealthy. Then we see the introduction of paper money, which originated in China and was documented with some marvel by Marco Polo. And here we see a separation from intrinsic value in the money itself, because now it's just paper, to the value of the money is the fiat of the king, Kublai Khan, who said that if you don't accept this money, you'll get beheaded. Then we see other innovations, like in the medieval period, you have the Medici banks. And if you were a merchant, you could take your money to a branch of the Medici bank, and they would give you a piece of paper saying how much you were depositing. And you could take that deposit slip, essentially, to another Medici bank in another province and withdraw from that bank. And this introduces the concept of branch banking, but it also separates how much money you have versus how much money you physically have to carry at any given point. And then in the 18th century, with the 9 Years' War between France and England, both countries were essentially broke. And the Bank of England forms by taking in gold and silver from customers and issuing paper, what we now call banknotes. And the banknotes themselves are now backed by the government of England. So the banknotes themselves become a currency. Similarly, we see something that John Law does in France with the Duke of Orleans. And this introduces the concept also of fractional reserves, because these banks are now able to lend out many times more than what they hold. But what they still hold is gold and silver, and the currency itself by countries in the years that follow is still pegged to some value, some amount of precious metal reserves that they have. But then when the Great Depression happens, we see countries now start to move away from the gold standard. So now the value of the currency is no longer tied to how much gold they have. And countries can now literally print their own money. And so we've seen the evolution of money from something that over time of something of intrinsic value to now this something that just represents almost like just a claim at the bank.
Yeah, Anant, I think that's exactly right. And I think there's some themes about money that you can tell from the history that you just recounted. What makes money useful is how durable it is, how portable it is, how divisible it is, how uniform it is. It's got to be limited. It can't be everywhere. And most importantly, it's got to be accepted by somebody or it's not worth anything at all. And so I just think of crypto as the next step in that evolution. And the questions we have to ask ourselves is, how does it fulfill those uses? And how does it compare with other forms of money?
All right, so let's bring in Molly. Molly, what is cryptocurrency?
Cryptocurrency is a form of, it's an asset basically that is issued digitally. And so there's no bank, there's no government backing it, but people are basically trading these digital assets amongst themselves using a technology called the blockchain. There are different types of cryptocurrencies, and so they're used for very different purposes. Probably the most common and well-known cryptocurrency is Bitcoin, which is used mostly as a speculative asset. People will buy it hoping that the price will go up. But there are also cryptocurrencies that are intended to be pegged to a more stable value. So they're called stablecoins, and they are intended to be worth $1 or €1 or something like that. It's also very common for companies to use cryptocurrencies as a way of trying to raise money. So instead of doing an IPO or something more classic or collecting money from investors in the more traditional sense, they will issue a token and then use the money brought in from people who are buying that token, hoping that the company will succeed to fund whatever it is that they're trying to do. So it's a very broad range of use cases, but it all centers around the fact that it's this digital asset that pretty much anyone can create, and then it's traded around amongst individuals.
And I think these buckets you've separated it into will be helpful for the discussion. On the one hand, you have something, like you said, supposed to be almost the currency, and another type of cryptocurrency that's supposed to be more like an investment in a company. And we'll deal with those individually. Molly, what about this industry concerns you?
I started paying a lot of attention to the cryptocurrency industry in late 2021, which was when crypto prices were reaching all-time highs, at least at the time. And the hype and excitement around the cryptocurrency industry was almost detached from reality. We were seeing people talking about how you could invest substantial amounts of money into this asset and make huge returns that you would never be able to find anywhere else. There were ads for crypto and crypto companies at the Super Bowl and in sporting events. These companies were all over the place advertising to people who normally would not get into crypto. They were not very risky investors. They were just your average people, but they were starting to hear that, oh, you need to get into crypto because this is how you can actually make these returns. And I was also at the same time seeing a lot of things in the cryptocurrency industry that really concerned me. There were scams happening at just an unbelievable rate where people would come up with a project, solicit all of these people to put money into it, and then just run away with the money. And there was almost nothing that was being done about it. Or companies would hire influencers or celebrities to pump up the value of a token and then dump all those tokens on retail investors and make a killing off of it at the expense of these retail investors. And so things like this were happening more than daily. It was constant. And yet in the media, I was seeing very little about it. I was mostly just seeing, look at this story of this guy who bought $100 of this token and now he's driving a Lamborghini and things like that. And so I felt no one seemed to be writing about the other side of it. So I might as well start doing it. And I just started documenting these issues and instances of collapses and frauds and scams. And next thing I knew, it turned into something a lot bigger than I expected.
And this is what has bugged me about the cryptocurrency industry is that I see a bunch of crypto bros and these companies, these private companies that are creating these tokens, and they are giving themselves a lot of these tokens. And now they are trying to find someone else to buy these tokens from them. They're trying to cash out on them. And it's crypto bros. And now you see much bigger VCs getting into it. So I call them like quiet luxury crypto bros, but it's the same thing. They're trying to find people to take the other end of the bag. And the people they're looking for, retail investors, public pension funds, they want someone else to be left holding the bag. And I see something that is like NFT. Think about, if you're listening to this podcast, think about how many billable hours your firm wasted having associates write client alerts explaining what an NFT is. And now they're worth practically zero. And the use cases I've heard for crypto are, one, it can avoid government oversight. And two, it's safe because it's on the blockchain. Well, one, avoiding government oversight is usually a sign of legal activity. And even the use cases people come up with, we can fund this movement in this country, this democracy movement. Yes, but you're still trying to avoid government oversight. It's just that may be a government we disagree with. And as terms of the safety of the blockchain, I mean, I just hear over and over again about how people are losing money on the how they're losing their crypto, is getting stolen, it's getting scammed. Can you talk a little bit about some of the big scandals that we've seen in this space?
Yeah, I think the myth that blockchains are inherently secure is one of the greatest achievements of the cryptocurrency industry thus far, because blockchains are secure in a very specific way. They are intended to prevent someone from changing the data stored in the ledger. And that is a very specific type of security that is useful against some very specific types of attacks. Unfortunately, there is a much broader range of attacks that happen in the crypto world that that particular security has no impact on. And those are the types of attacks that I've been documenting for a couple of years now, which is, outright theft, where people's wallet information is compromised, getting your password stolen, and suddenly someone has access to all of your crypto assets, which they can transfer to themselves. And there is no undo button. There is no calling your bank and saying, I fell victim to a fraud, please reverse that transaction, because of the way that blockchains were created, which is that you're not supposed to be able to reverse transactions on blockchains. This is described as a feature in a lot of cases, but I think it is also in a lot of cases quite a big bug. It is nice to be able to reverse fraud sometimes. And there are also the types of scams that I just described, which are more of like an investment scam, where people are convincing people to buy into some sort of an investment, or it's at least marketed as an investment, and then they break their promises and they run off with all the money. So those are sometimes described as pump and dumps, or in the NFT world, we heard a lot about rug pulls, which was an NFT project or any crypto project promising X, Y, and Z, collecting all the money, and then never following through on those things and just doing what they would with the money. But the list is honestly endless. Hacks, scams, frauds, it runs the gamut. And I feel like hackers are getting more and more creative every day.
Let's bring Carolyn in. Aren't these just giant pump and dump scams?
So first, I have to give a disclaimer, and that's that I am appearing here today in my capacity as an associate director of the Division of Enforcement at the SEC, and the views I express today are my own and not necessarily those of the commission, the commissioners, or the commission staff. In terms of your question of isn't crypto just a giant pump and dump scheme, I would actually say not necessarily. That's not how the SEC has looked at it. We definitely see pump and dump schemes and rug pulls and exit scams and however else you want to refer to it, as Molly said. There are definitely companies that have taken investors' hard-earned money and used it for themselves and their principals and haven't done a thing that they promised they were going to do. That's not new. We've seen that for as long as people have been trying to raise money from investors. And crypto, in some ways, is the latest thing. Several years ago, it was cannabis. Before that, people were slapping renewable energy on names and just using the latest fad. We also see other variations of fraud. We see companies that are not taking all of the money for themselves, but nevertheless are making materially misleading statements to investors about all gamut of things, who the people are behind it, whether they have conflicts of interest, what they are going to do and not do with the money that they raise, for example. But we also see at another end of the spectrum, crypto asset companies that are intending and do spend the money that they raise the way they said they were going to. It's still an issue under the securities laws, however, because they're not registering their offerings. And as a result, unlike other investment plans, they're not giving investors the information, the standardized information that investors are entitled to. There's a range of ways that the SEC looks at crypto assets.
And this goes back to the buckets that Molly set out earlier, where you have, and I don't even like to call this stuff cryptocurrency, because I think that legitimizes it in a way that it doesn't deserve. I think of these as valueless digital tokens. And so you have valueless digital tokens that are pretending to be an alternate currency, which I have the biggest problem with. And I think what you're talking about are valueless digital tokens that are intended to be like an investment vehicle. But how can this be a security? Are these companies actually selling something, creating products, have future revenues, or are they just this vaporware that's just trying to sucker in retail investors?
So the way that the SEC looks at whether something is a security is governed under Section 5 of the Securities Act of 1933. So it's been around for a very long time and has been applied to a whole range of financial products, with crypto assets being the latest one. And it's also governed by SEC versus Howey, which was a major Supreme Court case back from the 1940s. And it's a test that has stood the test of time. It's a 4-part test. The first question is, are investors investing money? And going back to the discussion that you and Aaron had at the beginning, money is very loosely defined. That can be fiat currency. It can be other crypto. It can be a whole range of things. Are they investing it in a common enterprise? So are they giving it to somebody who's supposed to take all of that money and do something with it? And then are they relying on the efforts of others, usually the people who are running or promoting the company, with a reasonable expectation of profits as a result? And that's what we have with a vast array of companies that are offering crypto assets. They are securities because people are investing money and expecting that the value of those assets is going to go up because of the efforts that those running that company are going to make. And that is going to make the product have more value, and in turn make the asset have more value. And it's not a surprise that we see those things therefore traded on digital trading platforms that look and operate very much like traditional exchanges.
So crypto as an investment token, I can at least get, even if I don't necessarily have as much faith in it as you do, but crypto as an alternate currency, isn't the trading in crypto based purely upon what you think the future value of that token is? No one's adopting this as a replacement for currency. How is this even legal for this product to be out there?
We've charged over 100 cases in the crypto asset space at the SEC. And every one of those comes back to the issue that to be under our jurisdiction, we have to establish that it is a security. And so our chairman has been out there and has said that he thinks the vast number of tokens that are out there are in fact securities. Whether something also has value as a currency, that's a separate question. But we look at whether or not it is being treated as a security. And yes, you can look at just about any one of these. You've got people who are trading them, people who are not holding them for a duration as an investment in a company long term, although that could also be a security. They are looking to make a profit on just the value of that asset. And that is how the vast majority of them are being marketed. The people who are putting those tokens out there to try to raise money are doing it in a way because they understand that they are reaching an audience that is looking to make money off of that token.
Anant, I'll speak in defense of cryptocurrency, if only for a moment, to say that I think speculation on the value of currency is much older than cryptocurrency, and no less maybe more frequent and therefore a little more stable, but not a lot more stable. And George Soros will tell you all about how unstable speculating in currency can be, because that's been how he's built his fortune and how he's often suffered losses as well. I don't know that the fact that any currency can be speculated in and that money can be lost is in and of itself a reason to reject it as a currency. I think the bigger question for cryptocurrency is whether it will ever be used for those first three uses that we talked about. Will people actually choose to be frequently paid in cryptocurrency? Will they choose to buy a car with cryptocurrency? Will they choose to shop at the grocery store with cryptocurrency? I think until that happens, it's an open question about whether this is really a currency.
Aaron, and now you have these big institutional investors like BlackRock talking about issuing crypto ETFs. Shades of 2008, when big financial institutions spread the contagion of high-risk mortgages throughout the economy by issuing mortgage-backed securities. But to me, the pitch is, hey, Hasbro manufactures the sole in-game currency for Monopoly. So CalPERS, come invest in this ETF we've created around Monopoly money. Molly, what is your reaction to, it's not all that dissimilar from other types of currency speculation?
I think it's accurate that people do speculate on currency. And I agree that the question around cryptocurrencies functioning as currency has a lot more to do with how it's used, I think, than the behavior of speculators. But I do think that the idea that crypto is a currency, I think that it may be misnamed. I often will try to refer to it as a crypto asset or something like that to clarify that it's really not currency that we're talking about. It is, in many cases, speculative asset or something more like that, because people aren't paying their rent with crypto. They aren't buying a hamburger with crypto, except in very specific use cases that are usually more of a marketing pitch. But I think that there's something to be said for the fact that when you decide that you're going to put your money into a crypto asset, you are betting, essentially, that someone will continue to believe that asset has value. And in a lot of cases, there isn't something underlying the value of that asset. And there isn't anything to ensure that in a week or a month or a year, someone will actually want to pay the same amount or more than you paid for it, which is a lot of the reason that people have lost so much money in the cryptocurrency industry. And I think that the argument that cryptocurrencies should have value because at some point in the future, people will agree that they have value and maybe accept them as a form of currency is something that should be viewed with serious skepticism, because most people wouldn't take that seriously, as you mentioned, if you were talking about monopoly money or poker chips or any other sort of approximation of money that is very common in the real world. But for some reason with cryptocurrency, people assign it this broader value, and they believe that at some point it may have value or it may be accepted. And we haven't seen that happen on any broad scale in the last 15 years or so that cryptocurrency has been around. And I don't necessarily understand where people are coming from when they make these broad claims that, Bitcoin is going to replace the dollar or something like that. A lot of those arguments just are not grounded in reality, but have been, unfortunately, very effective as far as the marketing of these crypto assets, where people think, oh gosh, maybe I should put some of my money in Bitcoin in case the dollar collapses, or whatever this sort of dystopian story may be.
Speaking of the marketing, like the marketing that preceded the collapse of Binance, that preceded the collapse of FTX, Carolyn, if Larry David, Matt Damon, and Tom Brady weren't white and famous, wouldn't they be in jail by now?
So first of all, I don't have the power to put anybody in jail. I've been doing this for over 20 years and still have to explain to my family that the SEC is a civil authority and does not have arrest authority. When you look at who we have charged publicly, we have charged celebrities for promoting crypto assets without disclosing that they're being paid to do so. And that's a violation of the securities laws. And we've charged a number of these celebrities who have paid fines as a result of that misconduct. That includes Kim Kardashian, Lindsay Lohan, Jake Paul, Paul Pierce. So there's a wide range of people who have used their influence to try to get people into this space. And the SEC, through these actions and also through speeches by our director and by our chair, have warned people and warned investors to look out for that because, again, this isn't specific to the crypto space, but we have seen in the past where people will try to encourage others to buy something without disclosing that they've been paid.
Under securities laws, you don't have conspiracy counts, do you?
Correct. We do not. We have either we can charge a direct violation, aiding and abetting, or causing, but we don't have a conspiracy charge.
You guys should get a conspiracy law. It comes in so handy.
I would love to have one.
Let me flip this a little bit because I've been coming at this pretty hard, anti-crypto. Could we make the same arguments about Pokemon cards or baseball cards? Look, there's no inherent value in a Pokemon card, yet there is a pretty well-regulated, baseball cards in particular, pretty well-regulated gray market for these. How is crypto the same or different?
If you're throwing that at me from the SEC's perspective, again, it goes back to that Howey test that I talked about before. You think about those elements. When you have crypto assets, what we see is that the company is putting in the effort to increase the value of whatever it is that somebody is buying, and therefore the value of what they can sell it for in the future. I think that's different than when you have something that is truly a collectible. For example, the examples that you were giving, where yes, you have companies that are selling and marketing those products, but they're not doing it in the way where they are taking the funds from investors, using that money to go back into the company to raise the value of what it is that they are selling.
I would just jump in here to say that I think that we have seen some real parallels between the crypto world and collectibles markets or the art market, for example, especially when it comes to NFTs, where they have been marketed much more like this is a piece of art or this is a collectible and you're buying it because you value the whatever image is associated with this NFT or whatever it might be. And those, I think, do have some parallels to the collectibles markets and the art market as well. Whether or not you think those are adequately regulated or not, I suppose, is a very different question. But I do think that a lot of crypto companies have chosen to market their assets based on where they think the favorable regulation is. And so you'll see an NFT company or any crypto company really very carefully crafting their marketing materials to refer to their tokens as this is a collectible. We make no promises about the future value of this asset, etc. Unfortunately, a lot of them also do make those types of promises, and they will end up saying things that are hinting very strongly at the people who are supposed to be buying these tokens that, okay, but if you buy it, I bet you could sell it in a year for twice as much. And so that's where they really run into issues with the securities laws and things like that, because they are really just trying to market to the legislation they want while evading the regulations that should apply. And I think that's been a very widespread issue in the crypto world to try to evade these regulations.
That is a great segue to another question I've had, which is why is the industry pushing so hard to get regulated by the CFTC rather than the SEC?
So I'd be interested in people's thoughts about this, but from the SEC's perspective, again, if something is a security, the securities laws establish that it needs to be registered. The offering needs to be registered with the SEC, and that's for a very good reason. That's because offerings have requirements in terms of the information provided to investors so they can make informed decisions. That's around things like whether there are conflicts of interest, information about the financial and operations of the company, information about its management. I can't speak for the crypto industry, but that is not an inexpensive process when it comes to time or resources. So I suspect that's been some of the resistance. But I do think it's important for companies to be able to be evaluated on a somewhat standardized basis and for investors to have that information so they can make informed decisions. We do have situations where there is overlap depending on the type of product between the SEC and the CFTC's jurisdiction. And we've had a number of cases that we've brought in parallel for that reason. So we work with the CFTC, just like we work with other regulators or criminal authorities, depending on the type of investigation. But I would be interested in the thoughts of my fellow panelists.
Yeah, I can't speak for the crypto industry either, as I am not a part of it. But from my observations, it feels to me like people in the cryptocurrency industry are broadly looking for the enforcement regime that is the most beneficial to them, rather than looking at the asset and trying to determine where it really falls under the various enforcers that exist. And to me, it seems that the hesitance to want to be regulated by the SEC comes down to the fact that the SEC has a lot of resources compared to the CFTC. It's a somewhat larger agency. It has more teeth, I would say, when it comes to enforcement to some extent, and has shown a lot of willingness, especially in the last year or two, to enforce cryptocurrency related cases. And so people see the CFTC, or the SEC rather, as the sort of stricter parent, I think, out there, and are looking to go to the more lenient one to operate because it is less expensive to comply with the regulations and because they have less of a chance of being dragged to court for violating those regulations. I don't think it necessarily comes down to the underlying function of the asset.
And this isn't unique to crypto. You see this in a lot of nascent industries where the big players will come out and say, we want to be regulated. They'll go to Congress and say, we want regulation. And then you'll offer them, and speaking of someone who's on Capitol Hill, you'll offer them a pretty substantial regulation. And not like that. We want you to codify this fugue state we're in right now that works for us, not like anything with teeth. So we'll see what happens with that. At the end of every episode of our Curious Amalgam, we do a segment called Our Curious Hat.
And now it's time for the Curious Hat.
Last year, following Fall Forum, the Antitrust Law section honored some women in our section who were brave enough to speak publicly about sexual harassment that they endured early on in their careers. The worlds of crypto and securities are male-dominated industries, and I'd be curious to hear about the experiences of our guests, harassment or criticism you face because of your gender, and what advice you might have for other young women in your fields who may be going through the same thing.
Yeah, I guess I would start. I come from the software world, which is also heavily male-dominated and has issues with harassment of women and things like that. So unfortunately, this has been somewhat of a common issue throughout my career. But I think it is far worse, at least in the crypto world, especially as a critic of the crypto world, because crypto people have formed a very strong community around their beliefs in this asset class that almost takes on a sort of religious tone to it at some points, where they are extremely hostile to what they perceive to be the out group or someone who threatens that group. And so I've definitely received a fair amount of harassment and certainly criticism, although criticism I would say is warranted in many cases, from the cryptocurrency world, which is unfortunate and I think really ought to be addressed by people in the cryptocurrency world who don't seem to view it as much of an issue. As for advice for other women who might be thinking about going into software or going into, I don't know, cryptocurrency criticism or whatever it might be, I think my advice is really just find your people. There are people in any industry, I think, who have gone through this type of thing, who can give advice or support or even just listen when you're talking about what you're going through. And having a community that you can lean on or bounce things off of can be enormously useful and also just comforting, I think, when things are tough. So that has definitely helped me a lot going through this, and I think would be good advice for anyone.
So I just think it's very telling and unfortunate that we're in the 21st century and we're still having to have this sort of conversation. It's an important conversation, but it just says a lot that this is where we are. Coming out of the Me Too movement, I think there was hope there that we were having a national conversation. And I think a lot of that has gone away, which is really unfortunate. And in some ways, I think it's gotten worse because I think we're living in a moment where there are people in all kinds of industries who feel like there is permission to be misogynistic or racist or homophobic or whatever it is. They feel a new permission to be out there with it. And then I think both because of that, in terms of what other people are witnessing, and also I think because people have set such a low bar of, I don't say those words, or I don't take those actions, I'm not that, I think it's created in some ways a very toxic moment in the culture. And I think we need a higher bar, first of all, for what it means to not be misogynistic or racist or homophobic or anything else. And it's important to keep having these sorts of conversations as a result.
Aaron, I'm still skeptical about cryptocurrency. I've learned a lot more. Still skeptical.
You're wise to be skeptical in all of these cases. Let's thank Carolyn and Molly for their time today and for their insights. I think it was a great conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you both.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you very much. It was really interesting.
All right. And we will see the rest of you the next time on Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.